The crossing. Not very many trains came along the line between Hutton and Hag's End. There were 7 regular trains a day in each direction, and for Albert Reed the time of these trains was the most important thing in life. Albert was the crossing keeper. At the point where the road crossing the line, there were 2 big red and white barriers, and whenever a train was coming, Albert had to put down the barriers across the road to stop cars from driving onto the line. An electric bell rang in his little house beside the crossing to tell him when a train was coming, but he knew the times of the train so well that he hardly needed the bell. Ding ding, ding ding, ding ding. It rang 14 times a day. He didn't really mind it himself. It was just part of his daily life, like the trains which came rushing by, so close that the whole house seemed to jump up and down. But his wife Vera often said,
"That bell! It will make me go mad one day, quite mad. It's even worse than the trains, filling the house with noise and dirt all day. When are we going to get out of this terrible place, Albert?"
"Now, dear, you know I could never find any other work with my bad leg. But really, it's not a bad life, not bad at all." Albert liked doing the same thing at the same time every day. He got up in the morning in time to put down the gates for 6:27 train from Hag's End, and he went to bed at night soon after the 10:13 from Hutton. The day in between was separated by the trains into 13 parts, during which he had his meals, worked in the garden, or read a book. He didn't mind having to stay by the crossing. He didn't mind living miles from the nearest house or shop. It was very different for Vera. The little crossing keeper's house was like a prison to her, and she got away from it as much as possible. On her bicycle she rode the 3 miles to Hag's End or the 10 miles to Hutton. Though Hag's End wasn't much of a place, only 3 or 4 shops, it was hardly worth going there, really. Hutton was better. How she wished they lived in Hutton again. Before Albert hurt his leg, he had worked in Hutton Station, and they had lived in the town. But he remembered that Vera had not been satisfied then. She found the town dirty, and she didn't like her neighbors. Albert sometimes wondered now why Vera didn't leave him. He even mentioned the question to her.
"What? You would get some other woman to live with you? And how would I live? I should have to work. No, you married me and you must keep me. Though it's a terrible life for any woman, I can tell you."
One afternoon a week Vera had to stay by the crossing, so that her husband could have some free time. His bad leg would not allow him to walk far, but he could take the bus into Hutton and get some new books or go to the cinema. He had to suffer for these afternoons when he got home, though. Vera was always worse than usual after a few hours by the crossing barrier. Albert was glad, really, that she was out so much. The little house and garden were peaceful without her, and he didn't mind getting his own meals ready. There was often someone to talk to, too. Most people who came along the road on foot stopped for a word with the crossing keeper. Albert knew everyone who lived in Hag's End and roundabout. When the barriers were down, of course, everyone had to stop. Albert was supposed to put them down as soon as the bell rang. But it was 2 or 3 minutes before the train came, and Albert usually let people through if he thought there was plenty of time.
Why do you lift the barriers for them?
Said his wife.
I never do it when I'm looking after the crossing. Let them wait.
There was one thing that Albert was afraid of, that one day he would fail to put down the barriers in time. He had read in the newspaper about a careless crossing keeper who had let a car through just as the train was coming. The train had run into the car, and everyone in the car had been killed. Albert was sure that he would never make such a mistake through carelessness, but perhaps something could happen to stop him from reaching the barrier in time? One night Albert had a dream. The bell was ringing. Ding ding, ding ding, ding ding, and he walked out as usual to put down the barriers. The 11:35 from Hutton was coming. He knew in his dream that it was the 11:35. He placed his hand on the handle which put down the barriers, and tried to turn it, but the handle would not move. Now he could see the train rushing round the corner, and a car was coming along the road. A woman was driving it, some woman he did not know. He tried to call out to her, but no sound came from his mouth. Helplessly, he watched her drive straight into the train. There was a terrible noise, and he awoke.
What's wrong with you?
His wife was saying.
Why are you making that noise? I can't even get a good night's sleep in this house.
Thank God it was only a dream, said Albert to himself. But he began to be afraid when the dream came again and again. Each time there were some things different. The train was the 6:05 or the 3:13. Sometimes he fell on the way to the barriers, and sometimes the car had reached the middle of the line when the train came. But some things were always the same. The dream always began with the sound of the bell, the train was always the train from Hutton, and the car was always driven by a woman, alone. He was not sure if it was the same woman. He looked carefully at her face, but it was never quite clear. What does it mean? Thought Albert. Am I one of those people who have dreams about the future? Perhaps it will all come true. The dream was never far from his mind. The sound of the bell, the rushing train, and the face of the strange woman were with him all day. He began to look very hard at all the women who drove over the crossing, but he did not find the face that he was looking for. He could hardly bear to hear the rail bell which rang 14 times a day, a sign now of something terrible coming near. The nights were even worse. The dream did not come very often, but every night he lay awake for long hours, afraid to go to sleep. At last Albert decided that he must tell someone about his dream. Not Vera, of course. She would laugh at him. No, he would go to Dr. Maxwell in Hutton. He would ask him for something to help him to sleep at night, and he would tell him everything. Dr. Maxwell had looking after him well when he had hurt his leg, and people said he was a very clever man. On his next free afternoon Albert took the bus into Hutton, and walked with some difficulty to Dr. Maxwell's house. The waiting room was rather full, and Albert was the last person to see the doctor. Dr. Maxwell listened with close attention to the story of the dream. "Well, what do you think, doctor?" cried Albert. "Do you think it may really happen one day? You don't believe in dreams, do you?"
Of course I believe in dreams. They have something important to tell us. But not about future events, oh, no. About ourselves. Our dreams can teach us to see into our own mind, if we are clever enough to understand them.
"But we all know what's happening in our own minds," said Albert. "We don't need dreams to tell us that."
You see, the mind is a very strange thing. It's like the sea, clear at the top but dark below. We can't see what happens in the deep part of the sea, but plenty of things happen there, I can tell you. And in the deep part of the mind, too.
"What do you mean? Do you mean that in some way we have thoughts that we don't know about?"
Yes, indeed. And often it is because we don't want to know about them. There are some thoughts and desires that we are afraid of, and so we don't let them come into the top part of our mind, but they are there, hiding at the bottom.
Albert imagined his hidden thoughts, like terrible great fish swimming about on the dark seabed. "How do you know about them if they're always hidden?" he said.
Through our dreams. When we are awake we can press down these thoughts, but when we are asleep they are free to rise into our dreams. And so our dreams can tell us about our hidden wishes and fears. It's not always easy to understand them, of course, but I think this time I can see the meaning of your dream.
Tell me, tell me." The doctor did not answer at once. At last he said,
Mr. Reed, I know that you are married, and have no children. I have met your wife, and seen you together. Am I right in thinking that your marriage is not happy?
"Quite right."
And your wife is sometimes unkind to you?
"Often."
Now, Mr. Reed, you will be surprised by what I tell you, surprised and probably angry. You see, I believe that this dream expresses your own wish. You dream that a woman is killed by the train, because you want this woman to die. The woman, Mr. Reed, is your wife.
"It's not true. I never thought anything like that. The idea has never come into my mind."
It hasn't come into the part of your mind that you can see. You do not allow yourself to think of it, but deep down, the idea is there.
"I don't believe it. The woman in the dream is not my wife. It's a woman I don't know at all."
You see, even in our dreams our hidden desires do not appear clearly. Sometimes they are too terrible, and they must be changed a little. Even in your dream you are afraid to wish openly for your wife to die, and so you put another woman in her place.
"Well, I don't know what to believe. It all sounds very strange, but you're a clever man, and there may be some truth in what you say. What can I do to stop the dreams?"
You won't have to do anything. Now that we've brought this hidden desire into an open part of your mind, it won't trouble you anymore. The dream won't come back. But I'll give you something to help you to sleep. And come and see me again in a few weeks, and we'll talk about your difficulties with your wife.
As Albert rode home on the bus, his head was full of the doctor's strange words. Could it really be true that in part of his mind he wanted Vera to die? It was better, he decided, to think no more about it. If there were dark thoughts hidden at the bottom of his mind, let them stay hidden. Dr. Maxwell was certainly right about one thing. The dream did not come again. But Albert still looked carefully at the face of every woman driver who passed through the crossing barriers. He did not feel safe yet. One afternoon Vera set out for Hutton on her bicycle. Albert was very glad to see her go. She had been more difficult than usual in the last few weeks. Perhaps this was because he was very careful now not to get angry with her. He spent a pleasant afternoon in the garden, without thinking once of the dream. Ding-ding! 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 It was the 6:05 from Hutton. Albert made his way slowly to the barriers. There was still plenty of time. His hand was on the handle when he saw Vera on her bicycle, at the top of the little hill which led down to the crossing. The train was coming now, but she couldn't see it. It was funny, he thought, how you couldn't see the train from that part of the road. He watched the bicycle coming down the hill, faster and faster, and his hand on the handle did not move. The bicycle was already under the train, and Vera was dead when at last Albert turned the handle and put down the barriers. "It's not my fault! It's not my fault!" he cried out. "It was that doctor who put the idea into my head." But the train was stopping with a terrible noise, and nobody heard his words. When the police came to find Albert, he was talking about fish. "They're swimming round and round inside my head," he cried. "Great big fish in the dark water. I can see them." The two police officers looked at each other, and one of them put a hand on Albert's arm.
"Well,"
he said,
"now we know why he did it. He's clearly quite mad, poor fellow."